They say a picture is worth 1,000 words, but sometimes what's missing from the picture speaks volumes more. My name is Margaret Sinclair, and for 42 years, I believed that the countless sacrifices I made for my family would earn me a place in their most precious moments. I was devastatingly wrong. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Before we dive deeper into this story that changed everything, I'd love to know, where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments below, because knowing you're out there, listening to my journey, gives me strength to share even the most painful parts. And if this story resonates with you, please hit that subscribe button. Tomorrow, I have something incredibly special planned that will show you just how powerful standing up for yourself can truly be. The moment that shattered my world wasn't dramatic or loud. It was quiet, deliberate, and happened on what should have been one of the happiest days of our family's life. Picture this. My daughter Victoria's elegant backyard in Rosewood Heights, string lights twinkling overhead, the scent of jasmine filling the evening air, and 3 generations of our family gathered to celebrate my granddaughter Emma's college graduation. I had spent weeks preparing for this day. I'd driven 4 hours from my small apartment in Cedar Falls, brought Emma's favorite lemon cake that I'd been making for her birthday since she was 3, and even bought a new dress, the first one I'd purchased for myself in over 2 years. I felt proud, grateful, and so excited to capture this milestone moment with our family. Then came the photographer, a tall, professional woman with an expensive camera and an even more expensive smile. "All right, family," she announced cheerfully, "let's gather everyone for some beautiful graduation photos." I moved forward naturally, smoothing my dress and preparing to stand next to my daughter and granddaughter, just as we had in countless family photos over the decades. But Victoria's hand shot out, stopping me mid-step. "Actually, Mom," she said, her voice carrying that particular tone I'd grown to dread, polite but cold, sweet but cutting. "We'd like to keep these photos to just the immediate family. You understand? Right? Emma's boyfriend Jake is here, and his parents, the Hendersons, and we want everything to look cohesive. Cohesive." The word hit me like a physical blow. After 42 years of motherhood, of raising Victoria as a single parent after her father walked out when she was just 8, of working double shifts at Mercy General Hospital to pay for her dance lessons, her college tuition, her wedding, and yes, even helping with the down payment on this very house where I now stood excluded, I wasn't cohesive enough for a family photo. Emma, my precious granddaughter, looked uncomfortable but said nothing. Jake's parents, people I'd met exactly once before, nodded approvingly as if this arrangement made perfect sense. And I stood there, frozen, watching as the photographer began arranging everyone else into perfect positions. "Of course, sweetheart," I managed to say, my voice somehow steady despite the earthquake happening in my chest. "I understand completely. But here's what Victoria didn't know as she posed with her perfect, cohesive family. Here's what none of them knew as they smiled and laughed and created memories that would last forever. Memories I was deemed unworthy to be part of. That photographer, the one capturing their joy while erasing my existence, I had paid for her. Every single penny of her $2,800 fee had come from my retirement fund. Victoria had called me 3 weeks earlier, tears in her voice, explaining how important it was to have professional photos of Emma's graduation, but how tight money was with Jake starting law school. Could I possibly help? Just this once? Just this once. Those 3 words had defined my relationship with my daughter for years. Just this once. Could I help with her car payment? Just this once. Could I cover Emma's school trip? Just this once. Could I lend her money for new furniture? Each time I said yes without hesitation, because that's what mothers do. That's what love looks like, isn't it? Standing there in that beautifully landscaped backyard in Rosewood Heights, watching a photographer I had secretly funded capture every face except mine, I realized something that would change everything. Love isn't supposed to be conditional. Respect isn't supposed to be earned through financial transactions. And family? Family isn't supposed to make you feel like an outsider at your own granddaughter's celebration. What happened next, when I finally found my voice and revealed the truth about who had actually made those precious photos possible, changed not just that evening, but the entire dynamic of our family forever. It exposed secrets I never knew existed, forced conversations that were decades overdue, and ultimately led to the most important decision I'd ever made about my own worth and dignity. You see, sometimes the most powerful revelations come not from what we say, but from finally refusing to stay silent about what we've quietly endured. Sometimes the greatest gift we can give our children isn't another check or another sacrifice. It's the demonstration of self-respect they never learned to show us. This is the story of how one excluded photograph led to the most honest conversation our family had ever had, and why sometimes the most loving thing you can do is stop enabling the people you love most. It's about discovering that your value isn't measured by your willingness to give, but by your courage to demand the respect you deserve. What unfolded that evening in Rosewood Heights was just the beginning. The real story, the one that will hopefully inspire you to examine your own relationships and boundaries, was what came after the cameras stopped clicking and the painful truth finally came to light. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The photographer was adjusting her lens, preparing for what she called the money shot, a 3-generation portrait with Emma in her cap and gown, Victoria beaming with pride, and Jake's parents positioned as if they'd been part of our family for decades. I stood off to the side, clutching my purse, trying to make myself invisible while my heart hammered against my ribs. "Perfect lighting, everyone," the photographer called out enthusiastically. "Mrs. Hamilton, could you shift slightly to the left? And Mr. Henderson, perhaps place your hand on Emma's shoulder. Yes, that's beautiful. This is going to be absolutely stunning." I watched Jake's mother, Patricia Henderson, position herself where I should have been standing. This woman who had met Emma exactly 3 times was now being immortalized as part of our family's most important milestone. While I, the grandmother who had never missed a single birthday, school play, or soccer game, was relegated to the role of invisible observer. "Mom, could you grab my phone from the kitchen counter?" Victoria called to me without even turning around. "I want to get some behind-the-scenes shots for Instagram," the casual dismissal in her voice, the way she could ask me to fetch things, while simultaneously excluding me from the very event I had made possible, created a knot of rage in my stomach that I'd never felt before. But I smiled, nodded, and walked toward the house like the obedient mother I'd trained myself to be. As I passed the photographer's equipment bag, I caught sight of something that made me pause. There, tucked into a side pocket, was a copy of the contract and invoice. My eyes fell on the total, $2,800, paid in full. Payment method: check from Margaret Sinclair. The photographer noticed me looking and smiled warmly. "Are you Margaret?" she asked quietly, careful not to interrupt the photo session happening behind us. "I just wanted to say thank you so much for making this possible. Your daughter mentioned what a wonderful surprise this was from you. Emma is lucky to have such a generous grandmother." My throat constricted. Victoria had told the photographer that I had paid for this session, had even called it a wonderful surprise. Yet here I stood, excluded from every single frame, treated as nothing more than a financial benefactor who didn't merit inclusion in the actual memories being created. "Yes," I managed to whisper. "I'm Margaret. I have to say," the photographer continued, adjusting her camera settings. "In my 20 years of doing family photography, the grandparents who surprise the family with professional photos are usually front and center. They're so proud to be part of these milestone moments. Are you feeling all right? You look a bit pale. The innocent question hit me like lightning. This stranger, this professional who had photographed hundreds of families, immediately recognized something that my own daughter couldn't, or wouldn't, see. Grandparents who pay for family photos are usually included in them. What was happening here wasn't normal. It wasn't right. Actually, I heard myself saying, my voice growing stronger with each word, I think there's been a misunderstanding about these photos. The photographer looked confused. Oh, what kind of misunderstanding? Behind us, Victoria was laughing at something Jake's father had said, completely absorbed in arranging the perfect shot with her cohesive family. Emma caught my eye for just a moment, and I saw something there. A flicker of discomfort, perhaps even guilt. She knew this was wrong, but she was 22 years old and caught between her mother's wishes and her own instincts. The misunderstanding, I said, my voice carrying clearly across the backyard, is about who actually belongs in these family photos. Victoria's laughter stopped abruptly. The photographer lowered her camera. Jake's parents turned to look at me with expressions that ranged from confused to mildly annoyed. "Mom," Victoria said sharply, "we're in the middle of a photo session. Whatever this is about can wait." "No," I said, and the firmness in my own voice surprised me. "Actually, it can't wait. You see, everyone," I continued, addressing not just Victoria, but the entire group. "There seems to be some confusion about the financial arrangements for today's photography session." Victoria's face went white. She knew exactly where this was headed. "What arrangements?" Patricia Henderson asked, clearly irritated by the interruption to what she probably saw as her moment to be photographed with her son's accomplished girlfriend. I pulled the invoice from the photographer's bag and held it up. "These arrangements, the $2,800 that paid for this lovely photo session, the money that came from my retirement account 3 weeks ago when Victoria called me, crying about how important it was to have professional photos, but how impossible it was financially with Jake starting law school." The silence that followed was deafening. Emma's mouth fell open. Jake shifted uncomfortably. The photographer looked from me to Victoria with growing understanding. "I paid for these photos," I continued, my voice steady now, each word deliberate and clear. "Every single penny came from my savings. Victoria asked me to make this possible for Emma's graduation, and I was honored to do it. What I wasn't told was that paying for the photography session would somehow disqualify me from being included in any of the photographs." Victoria's face had progressed from white to red to an alarming shade of purple. "Mom, you're embarrassing yourself and us. This isn't the time or place for..." "For what?" I interrupted, something I had never done to Victoria in 42 years of being her mother. "For honesty? For asking why the person who made this moment possible is being treated like an unwelcome stranger? For wondering why Jake's parents, lovely as they are considered more cohesive with our family than Emma's actual grandmother?" The photographer, bless her professional heart, was trying to stay neutral, but I could see the wheels turning in her head. She'd seen family drama before, but this particular configuration, paying grandmother excluded while boyfriend's parents included, was clearly new territory. "Perhaps," the photographer said diplomatically, "we could take several different groupings, some with the extended family, some more intimate." "No," Victoria snapped, her composure finally cracking. "We've planned the shots we want. Mom knew the arrangements when she agreed to help with the cost." "Did I?" I asked, and now my voice carried 42 years of suppressed hurt and disappointment. Did I know that helping meant I'd be pushed aside like hired help? Did I know that paying for professional family photos meant I wouldn't be considered worthy of being in them? That's when Emma finally spoke up. Her voice was quiet, but in the tense silence of the backyard, every word carried clearly. "Grandma, Margaret," she said, tears starting to form in her eyes. "I didn't know you paid for the photographer." And there it was, the moment that would change everything. Because Emma's innocent statement revealed something even more devastating than my exclusion from the photos. It revealed that Victoria had hidden my financial contribution from her own daughter, erasing not just my presence from the visual record of this day, but my generosity from the family narrative entirely. What happened next would force conversations that had been brewing for decades, expose truths that would reshape our entire family dynamic, and ultimately lead to the most important boundary I'd ever set. But first, I had to find the courage to speak a truth that would shatter the careful facade Victoria had been maintaining for years. The photographer stood there, camera in hand, waiting. Jake's parents looked like they desperately wanted to disappear. Emma looked between her mother and me with growing understanding and horror, and I realized that this moment, this seemingly simple disagreement about a family photo, was actually the culmination of decades of being taken for granted, minimized, and treated as nothing more than a financial resource with no feelings of her own. It was time to change that narrative forever. The silence in Victoria's backyard stretched on as everyone processed what I had just revealed. But to understand how we arrived at this devastating moment, you need to know the story of how a young single mother in Cedar Falls built her entire life around making sure her daughter never felt the abandonment she herself had experienced. Journey as Victoria's mother began when she was just 8 years old, the day her father, David, walked out of our lives without so much as a goodbye note. I came home from my shift at Mercy General Hospital to find Victoria sitting on our front porch steps, still in her school uniform, clutching her favorite stuffed rabbit. She looked up at me with those enormous brown eyes and said, "Daddy took his suitcase, Mommy." "Is he coming back for dinner?" I had $347 in our checking account, a mortgage payment due in 2 weeks, and no idea how I was going to explain to an 8-year-old that her father had decided we weren't worth staying for. That night, after Victoria fell asleep in my bed because she was afraid to be alone, I made a promise that would define the next 4 decades of my life. My daughter would never want for anything I could possibly provide, and she would never doubt that she was worthy of complete, unconditional love. Cedar Falls wasn't exactly a town bursting with opportunities for a single mother with a high school education, but I was determined to make it work. I took on extra shifts at the hospital, moved us to a smaller apartment closer to Victoria's school, and started what would become a decades-long pattern of saying yes to every request, every need, every want my daughter expressed. When Victoria was 10 and desperately wanted to take ballet lessons like her friend Sarah, I picked up weekend shifts in the hospital cafeteria to pay for classes, shoes, and costumes. When she was 14 and insisted she needed a particular brand of jeans to fit in at Jefferson Middle School, I skipped lunches for a month to afford them. When she wanted to attend the expensive summer arts camp in the state capital, I sold my grandmother's wedding ring to make it happen. "You're spoiling her, Margaret," my sister Ruth warned me during one of her rare visits from Portland. "Children need to learn that money doesn't grow on trees." But Ruth had never watched her 8-year-old daughter stand at the window every evening for weeks, waiting for a father who would never return. She had never seen the particular kind of hurt that comes from abandonment, and I was determined Victoria would never experience that again, from anyone, especially not from me. Victoria excelled in school, just as I had hoped. She was bright, articulate, and had inherited my stubborn determination along with her father's charm. When high school graduation approached and she announced her intention to attend Westfield College, a prestigious private institution 2 hours away, I didn't hesitate to support her dream, even though the tuition was more than I made in a year. "I can get scholarships, Mom," Victoria had said, spreading college brochures across our kitchen table. "And I'll work part-time. You won't have to pay for everything." But scholarships only covered so much, and part-time jobs barely made a dent in the cost of books, housing, and the countless incidental expenses that seemed to crop up every month. I refinanced our small house twice to pay for Victoria's education. I traded in my reliable car for an older model and used the difference for her meal plan. When she called in tears during her sophomore year because her laptop had crashed and she desperately needed a new one for her graphic design program, I took out a personal loan without hesitation. "Thank you, Mom," she would say after each crisis was resolved. Each need was met. "I don't know what I'd do without you. I promise I'll pay you back when I graduate and get a good job." Those words sustained me through the exhaustion, the financial stress, and the growing realization that my own retirement savings were disappearing to fund my daughter's future. Victoria did graduate, and she did get a good job with a marketing firm in Rosewood Heights. She moved into a beautiful apartment, started dating Jake, and seemed to be building the successful, stable life I had sacrificed so much to make possible. But the promise to pay me back never materialized. Instead, the requests continued, just with different justifications. "Mom, I need help with the security deposit for a bigger apartment. Jake and I are getting serious and we need more space. Mom, my car broke down and I need reliable transportation for work. Could you help with a down payment? Mom, Jake proposed. Could you possibly help with the wedding? His parents are contributing, but their idea of a wedding is so much more elaborate than what I can afford." Each time, I said yes. Each time I told myself this would be the last time, that once Victoria was truly established, the requests would stop. When Emma was born 3 years ago, I was overjoyed to become a grandmother and threw myself into this new role with the same generous spirit I had brought to motherhood. Baby clothes, toys, furniture for the nursery, educational programs, music, lessons. I wanted Emma to have every advantage, just as I had wanted for Victoria. When Victoria mentioned that good childcare in Rosewood Heights was impossibly expensive, I offered to drive down every weekend to babysit, saving them hundreds of dollars in childcare costs while I covered the gas and wear on my aging car. "You're such an amazing grandmother," Victoria would say, as I played peekaboo with Emma or read her bedtime stories during my weekend visits. "Emma is so lucky to have you." Those moments felt like vindication for all the sacrifices, all the late shifts, all the times I chose Victoria's needs over my own. But somewhere along the way, something had shifted. The gratitude became more perfunctory, the requests more demanding, and my role in Victoria's life became increasingly defined by what I could provide rather than who I was. When Victoria bought her house in Rosewood Heights, the same house, where I now stood excluded from family photos, she had called me with exciting news and a familiar request. "Mom, we found the perfect house. It's in an amazing neighborhood, great schools for Emma, everything we've dreamed of. There's just one tiny problem. We're about $15,000 short on the down payment. I know it's a lot to ask, but could you possibly help? Jake's parents are contributing too, so we'd all be investing in Emma's future." I had liquidated the last of my actual retirement investments to provide that down payment, telling myself that helping Victoria achieve homeownership was the final gift I needed to give. Surely now, with a beautiful home, a stable relationship, and a thriving career, she would no longer need my financial support. Instead, the requests had continued, with increasing frequency. Emma's preschool tuition, a new roof after a storm, furniture for the guest room where Jake's parents stayed when they visited, and now, most recently, professional photography for Emma's graduation celebration. Standing in Victoria's beautifully landscaped backyard, watching my daughter's face cycle through emotions, as she realized her carefully constructed narrative was crumbling, I finally understood what my sister Ruth had tried to tell me decades ago. I hadn't been protecting Victoria from abandonment. I had been enabling her to abandon me, piece by piece, until all that remained of our relationship was my willingness to write checks and her expectation that I would continue doing so without complaint. The photographer cleared her throat gently, reminding all of us that we were still in the middle of what was supposed to be a celebration. Emma stepped closer to me, her graduation cap slightly askew, her young face troubled by revelations she was only beginning to understand. "Grandma Margaret," she said quietly, "I really didn't know you paid for all this. Mom just said the photographer was taken care of. The phrase stung, taken care of, as if my contribution was just another utility bill to be managed rather than a generous gift from a loving grandmother. Victoria's eyes flashed with something between guilt and anger. Emma, this is between your grandmother and me. Family finances are complicated and— Are they? I interrupted, finding my voice again. Are they really that complicated, Victoria? Because from where I stand, they seem quite simple. I give, and you take. I sacrifice, and you benefit. I pay, and you exclude me from the very events I make possible. Jake's parents were clearly uncomfortable now, whispering to each other and glancing toward the house as if plotting their escape. The photographer had diplomatically moved away to check her equipment, giving us the illusion of privacy while remaining close enough to continue her work once this family drama resolved itself. But this drama had been building for 42 years, and it would take more than a few uncomfortable minutes to resolve, because what Victoria didn't yet realize, what none of them knew, was that this photo session represented the last withdrawal I would ever allow from the bank of Margaret's sacrifices. The account was about to be permanently closed. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife as Victoria struggled to regain control of the situation. She forced a bright smile and clapped her hands together, as if she could somehow reset the entire scene back to her carefully orchestrated vision. Okay, everyone, she announced with false cheerfulness. Let's not let a little family misunderstanding ruin Emma's special day. We can sort out the financial details later. Right now, we need to focus on getting these beautiful photos while we still have good light. But the damage was done. Jake's parents, Robert and Patricia Henderson, were no longer looking at me like an intrusive outsider. They were looking at Victoria with barely concealed confusion and disapproval. Patricia, in particular, seemed to be reassessing everything. She thought she knew about this family dynamic. Actually, Patricia said slowly, her voice carefully measured, perhaps Robert and I should step back and let the family handle their discussion. We don't want to intrude on what seems to be a private matter. Victoria's panic was almost palpable. No, please don't go anywhere. This isn't a big deal at all. My mother just gets emotional sometimes, especially about money. She has a tendency to make things more dramatic than they need to be. The casual dismissal of my feelings, the subtle implication that I was being unreasonable, sent a fresh wave of hurt through me. But more than that, it illuminated a pattern I had been too close to see clearly. This wasn't the first time Victoria had minimized my concerns or painted me as the problem when I dared to express discomfort with how I was being treated. Emma, bless her heart, was looking increasingly distressed. Mom, she said quietly, maybe we should listen to what Grandma Margaret is trying to say. I mean, if she paid for the photographer— Emma, sweetheart, Victoria interrupted, her voice taking on that particular tone she used when she wanted to shut down conversation without appearing unreasonable. Adults handle financial arrangements differently than you might understand. Your grandmother offered to help with the photography as a gift, and we accepted gratefully. That doesn't mean she gets to dictate how we conduct our family celebrations. Dictate? The word escaped my lips before I could stop it. Is that what you think I'm doing? Dictating? By simply asking to be included in the photos I paid for? Jake, who had been silently observing this family drama unfold, finally spoke up. Maybe we could just take a few different shots. Some with everyone. Some smaller groups? It doesn't have to be all or nothing, right? Victoria whirled on him with surprising venom. Don't you start, Jake. This is exactly the kind of drama I was trying to avoid. I told you my mother could be difficult about these things. The casual cruelty of that statement, describing me as difficult for wanting basic inclusion and respect, was like a slap across the face. But it also revealed something crucial. Victoria had been preparing Jake for this moment, had been setting the narrative that any objection I might raise would be labeled as me being difficult. Difficult about what things exactly? I asked, my voice gaining strength with each word. Difficult about paying for family events and then being excluded from them? Difficult about giving my daughter $15,000 for a house down payment and then not being welcome at family gatherings in that house? Difficult about working extra shifts for 40 years to fund your life and then being told I don't fit the aesthetic of your family photos? The photographer, God bless her professional training, was making a valiant effort to disappear into the background while still being ready to resume work when this resolved. But I could see in her eyes that she was beginning to understand the true scope of what she was witnessing. Victoria's mask was starting to slip. That's not fair, Mom. You make it sound like everything you've done for me was some kind of loan with strings attached. I never asked you to sacrifice so much. I never asked you to take on extra shifts or refinance your house. You chose to do those things. You're right, I said. And for a moment, Victoria looked relieved, thinking I was conceding the point. I did choose to do those things. What I didn't choose was to be treated like hired help afterward. What I didn't choose was to have my contributions hidden from my own granddaughter. What I didn't choose was to be deemed unworthy of basic respect and inclusion. Emma's eyes were filling with tears now. Mom, is it true? Did Grandma Margaret really help with our house? And my preschool? And other stuff I don't know about? Victoria shot me a look of pure fury. Emma, this isn't the time or place for this conversation. Your grandmother is upset about the photos and she's bringing up unrelated. Unrelated? I couldn't keep the incredulity out of my voice. Victoria, there is a direct line between me paying for this photographer and me being excluded from these photos. There is a direct relationship between me funding your lifestyle and you treating me like an embarrassment to be hidden away when it's convenient. Patricia Henderson cleared her throat delicately. Perhaps Robert and I really should give you some privacy to work this out. This seems like a family matter that requires honest conversation. Please don't leave. Victoria's desperation was showing now. This will all blow over in a few minutes. My mother just needs to calm down and remember that this day is about Emma, not about her. That phrase, not about her, crystallized something for me. When had any day ever been about me? When had my needs, my feelings, my desire for basic respect ever been prioritized in this family? Victoria was right that this day should be about Emma. But why did that automatically mean I had to be erased from it? You know what, Victoria? I said, my voice surprisingly calm now. You're absolutely right. This day should be about Emma. And Emma should know the truth about how this day became possible. I turned to my granddaughter, whose young face was a canvas of confusion and growing understanding. Emma, sweetheart, your mom asked me 3 weeks ago if I could help make professional photos happen for your graduation. She was crying on the phone, telling me how important it was to capture this milestone, but how impossible it was financially with Jake starting law school. She asked if I could possibly help, just this once. Emma nodded slowly, her graduation cap catching the late afternoon sunlight. I said yes immediately, I continued, because I love you and I love your mother, and I wanted this day to be special for you. I took $2,800 out of my retirement savings, money I've been setting aside for my own future, because I thought capturing this moment for our family was worth the sacrifice. Victoria's face was cycling through shades of red that would have concerned me if I were still in nursing mode. Mom, you're making this sound... I'm making this sound exactly like what it is, I interrupted firmly. I'm telling Emma the truth about how much I love this family, and how far I'll go to make special moments happen for the people I care about. But I'm also going to tell her the truth about what I expected in return. Emma was listening intently now, and even Jake seemed genuinely interested in hearing this story through to its conclusion. What I expected in return, Emma, wasn't money. I never expected to be paid back. What I expected was to be valued as part of this family. What I expected was to be included in the celebration I made possible. What I expected was for your mother To say, "Thank you, Mom, for making this photography session happen. Of course you'll be in the photos with us." Victoria opened her mouth to protest, but I held up my hand. Instead, I was told I wasn't cohesive enough for the family photos. I was asked to fetch your mother's phone like hired help, while Jake's parents, lovely people but folks who've met you 3 times, were positioned as central members of our family's most important moments. The silence that followed was different from the earlier tension. This wasn't the awkward pause of people trying to figure out what to say. This was the heavy silence of people processing difficult truths. Jake was the first to speak. "Mrs. Sinclair, I had no idea you had paid for the photographer. Victoria, why didn't you tell us?" And there it was. The question that would crack open years of carefully constructed narratives and force us all to confront the uncomfortable truth about how this family really functioned. Jake's question hung in the air like a challenge Victoria couldn't deflect. "Victoria, why didn't you tell us?" The simplicity of it was devastating because there was no good answer, no explanation that wouldn't reveal the calculated nature of her deception. Victoria's mouth opened and closed several times before she managed to speak. I didn't think it mattered who paid for what. The important thing was getting beautiful photos of Emma's graduation. The logistics weren't really anyone else's business." "Logistics?" Patricia Henderson repeated, her eyebrows rising. "I'm sorry, dear, but excluding the person who funded an event from participating in it isn't logistics. It's quite unusual." Emma stepped closer to me and I felt her small hand slip into mine. "Grandma Margaret," she said quietly, "I'm so sorry. I didn't know. If I had known, I would have insisted you be in every single photo." Victoria's face crumpled for just a moment before hardening again. "Emma, you don't understand how complicated adult relationships can be. Your grandmother has a way of making everything about herself when she contributes financially to something." The accusation was so breathtakingly unfair that I actually laughed, a short, bitter sound that surprised everyone, including myself. "Making it about myself? Victoria, I've spent 42 years making everything about you. The only thing I've ever asked for in return is basic respect and inclusion. Apparently, that was too much." "You see?" Victoria said, gesturing toward me as if I was proving her point. "This is exactly what I mean. One small disagreement about photo arrangements and suddenly I'm the villain who's never appreciated anything you've done for me." But Jake was shaking his head slowly, his expression troubled. "Victoria, this isn't a small disagreement. Mrs. Sinclair paid nearly $3,000 for our photography session. She should absolutely be in the photos. Hell, she should be front and center if she wants to be." "Don't you dare take her side against me," Victoria snapped at Jake, her composure finally cracking completely. "You have no idea what it's like. Having a mother who uses money to control every situation, who makes you feel guilty for accepting help, who—" "Stop." The word came out of my mouth with such force that everyone froze. "Just stop, Victoria. Right now." I had reached my breaking point. Not just for this afternoon, not just about these photos, but about 42 years of being mischaracterized, manipulated, and taken for granted by the daughter I had sacrificed everything to raise. "You want to talk about control?" I continued, my voice steady but carrying decades of suppressed hurt. "Let's talk about control. Let's talk about how you've controlled our relationship by training me to believe that my value is tied to my willingness to give. Let's talk about how you've controlled the narrative by hiding my contributions from your own daughter, from Jake, from his parents, so that you can take credit for the lifestyle my money makes possible." Victoria opened her mouth to protest, but I wasn't finished. "Let's talk about how you've controlled every family gathering by positioning me as the outsider who's lucky to be included, rather than the grandmother who's been funding these events. Let's talk about emotional control, Victoria. Because you've spent years making me feel like asking for basic respect makes me needy and difficult. The photographer had completely abandoned any pretense of continuing the session and was now openly watching what was clearly the most dramatic family confrontation she'd ever witnessed. Emma was crying quietly, still holding my hand, and Jake looked like he was beginning to understand that he'd been dating someone he didn't really know. "That's not true," Victoria said, but her voice lacked conviction now. "I've always been grateful for your help. I've always appreciated—" "When?" I interrupted. "When was the last time you actually expressed gratitude rather than just expectation? When was the last time you called me just to talk, rather than because you needed something? When was the last time you invited me to a family event because you wanted me there, not because you felt obligated?" The silence stretched on because Victoria couldn't answer those questions. We both knew the truth, that our relationship had devolved into a series of financial transactions disguised as family love. Patricia Henderson cleared her throat gently. "Margaret," she said, using my first name for the first time, "I think you should know that Robert and I had assumed you and your husband were financially comfortable and that the photography session was just a nice gesture from Emma's grandparents. We had no idea about your personal sacrifices." "There is no husband," I said quietly. "Emma's grandfather left when Victoria was 8. I've been doing this alone for 34 years. The revelation seemed to shock Jake's parents into an even deeper understanding of the scope of what I had accomplished and what Victoria had hidden. A single mother, working hospital shifts, putting her daughter through college, helping with a house down payment, funding family celebrations, and being excluded from the very events she made possible. Emma pulled on my hand. "Grandma Margaret, why didn't you ever tell me about Daddy leaving? Why didn't I know about how much you've helped us?" Before I could answer, Victoria stepped forward, her face flushed with anger and embarrassment. "Because some things are private, Emma. Because financial arrangements between adults aren't children's business. Because your grandmother has a martyr complex and loves to remind everyone of her sacrifices." That final accusation, the claim that I had a martyr complex, broke something inside me that had been barely holding together for years. The suggestion that acknowledging my contributions made me manipulative, that asking for basic respect made me difficult, that wanting to be included in my own family made me controlling. "You know what, Victoria?" I said, and my voice was surprisingly calm given the storm of emotions raging inside me. "You're absolutely right about one thing. I do remind people of my sacrifices. And do you know why? Because nobody else does. Because I've been invisible in this family for so long that even my own granddaughter doesn't know the basic facts about how her life has been funded." I turned to Emma, whose tears were flowing freely now. "Sweetheart, I never told you about your grandfather leaving because I didn't want you to carry that hurt. I never told you about my financial help because I thought it would make you feel guilty or obligated. I thought love meant protecting you from knowing how hard things had been." Then I looked back at Victoria. "But what I realize now is that, by hiding my struggles and my contributions, I enabled you to take them for granted. I enabled you to build a life on my sacrifices while pretending they didn't exist. I enabled you to treat me like a convenient resource instead of your mother." Jake was staring at Victoria with an expression I'd never seen before, a mixture of disappointment and recognition. "Is this true? About the house down payment? About Emma's expenses? About all of it?" Victoria's last defenses were crumbling. "Jake, you don't understand. My mother has always been. She has expectations when she helps. She makes you feel guilty if you don't include her in every decision, every celebration." "I had one expectation," I said firmly. "One. That I would be treated with the same respect you show to strangers. That I would be included in the family I've spent my life supporting. That was it, Victoria. That was my only expectation." Emma suddenly released my hand and walked over to the photographer. "Excuse me," she said in a voice that was stronger than her tears suggested. I would like you to take a picture of me with my grandmother Margaret. Just the two of us first, and then one with anyone else who wants to be in it." The simple request from my granddaughter, choosing to honor me when her own mother had excluded me, was both heartbreaking and healing. It was also the moment that would change everything, because Victoria's response to Emma's request would reveal just how deep her selfishness truly ran. And what happened next would force me to make the most difficult decision of my life as a mother. Emma's request for a photo with me hung in the air like a moment of truth that would define everything that came next. The photographer looked questioningly between Emma and Victoria, clearly unsure whose authority to follow in this family drama that had spiraled far beyond anything in her professional experience. Victoria's response was swift and sharp. "Emma, absolutely not. We are not rearranging this entire photo session because your grandmother is having an emotional breakdown. We planned these shots weeks ago and we're sticking to the plan." The casual dismissal of Emma's heartfelt gesture, calling my legitimate hurt an emotional breakdown, crystallized everything I needed to understand about my daughter's character. But Emma, bless her 22-year-old heart, stood her ground, with a strength that reminded me exactly why I had fought so hard to give her every opportunity in life. "Mom, I'm not asking to rearrange anything. I'm asking to add something. Grandma Margaret paid for this photographer, and she should be in photos if she wants to be. More than that, I want photos with her. She's my grandmother, and I love her." Victoria's face twisted with a mixture of fury and panic. "Emma, you don't understand what you're doing. You're rewarding manipulative behavior. Your grandmother is using guilt and money to force her way into situations where she doesn't belong." "Where she doesn't belong," Jake finally erupted, his voice louder than anyone had heard it all afternoon. "Victoria, what the hell is wrong with you? She's Emma's grandmother. She paid for this entire session. She belongs wherever she wants to be in these photos." Victoria whirled on Jake with venomous intensity. "Don't you dare raise your voice at me, especially not to defend her. You have no idea what it's like growing up with a mother who holds every dollar she ever spent on you over your head, who makes you feel guilty for every kindness, who—" "Stop lying." My voice cut through Victoria's tirade like a blade. The words came out quietly, but with such finality that everyone fell silent. "Just stop lying, Victoria. To them, to yourself, to me. We all know that's not what happened here, and we all know that's not who I am." I walked over to where the photographer stood with her camera. This professional woman who had inadvertently become a witness to 4 decades of family dysfunction finally coming to light. "What's your name?" I asked. "Her gently." "Sarah," she replied, clearly grateful for a moment of normal human interaction in the midst of this chaos. "Sarah Chen." "Sarah, I want to ask you something professional," I said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "In your 20 years of family photography, have you ever had a situation where the person who paid for the session was excluded from the photos?" Sarah glanced nervously at Victoria, then back at me. "No, ma'am, I haven't. Usually when grandparents gift a photo session, they're the ones most excited to be photographed with the family. And in your professional opinion, would it be unusual for someone to hide from their family who had paid for photography services?" "Extremely unusual," Sarah admitted, growing more confident as she realized her honest observations were helping to validate what everyone could see. "Generally, gifting a photo session is something families celebrate and acknowledge." Victoria's desperation was reaching new heights. "This is ridiculous. You're all ganging up on me because I tried to plan a nice, cohesive photo session for my daughter's graduation. I'm being vilified for wanting Emma's photos to look professional and polished." "No," I said firmly. "You're being held accountable for taking my money and then treating me like I was unwelcome at the event that money made possible. There's a difference, Victoria, and everyone here can see it except you." Patricia Henderson, who had been silent for several minutes, finally spoke up. "Victoria, dear, I think perhaps Robert and I should leave now. This feels like something your family needs to work through privately." "Please don't go." Victoria's voice cracked with desperation. "I wanted you both to be part of Emma's celebration. I wanted you to see how wonderful our family is, how well Emma has turned out, how proud we all are of her achievements. We can see how wonderful Emma is," Robert Henderson said quietly. "That's never been in question. But Victoria, what we're seeing right now, this isn't wonderful. This is a young woman treating her mother with shocking cruelty after that mother has apparently sacrificed everything to support her." The judgment from Jake's parents, people Victoria had been so desperate to impress, seemed to hit her like a physical blow. Her carefully constructed image of the perfect family was crumbling in real time, and everyone could see the ugly reality underneath. Emma walked over to me and took my arm. "Grandma Margaret, would you please be in a photo with me? Just you and me first, then maybe one with Jake if he wants, and then anyone else who would like to join us?" The simple dignity of my granddaughter's request, the way she had taken control of a situation that the adults had allowed to spiral into chaos, made me prouder of her than any college degree ever could. "I would be honored," I said, my voice steady despite the tears threatening to spill over. Victoria stepped forward, blocking our path to where Sarah was setting up for the photo. "If you do this, if you take photos without me, if you exclude me from my own daughter's graduation celebration, I will never forgive you. Any of you." The threat hung in the air, heavy, manipulative, and revealing. Victoria was attempting to use emotional blackmail to maintain control, threatening to withdraw her love if she didn't get her way. It was, I realized, exactly what she had been doing to me for years, just more subtle usually. Emma looked at her mother with something approaching pity. "Mom, no one is excluding you. You're excluding yourself. You can be in photos too if you want. All I asked for was one picture with my grandmother who paid for this session and who I love very much." "And if I refuse?" Victoria asked, her voice sharp with challenge. Emma straightened her shoulders, and I saw in that moment the strong, principled woman she was becoming. "Then I guess you refuse, but that's your choice, not mine, and not Grandma Margaret's." It was then that I made the decision that would change everything. The decision I had been building toward not just this afternoon, but for years. The decision that would either save my relationship with my daughter or end it entirely, but would definitely preserve my self-respect. I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app, the one I had used that morning to check my dwindling retirement account. Balance. With everyone watching, I scrolled to the transaction history and found the entry I was looking for. A $2,800 check to Sarah Chen Photography, paid 3 weeks earlier. "Sarah," I said clearly, "I'm going to show you something, and I want everyone here to see it." I held up my phone, displaying the bank transaction that proved beyond any doubt who had paid for this photography session. "This is the payment for today's photos, taken directly from my retirement savings on May 8th. I want everyone to see this because I'm about to make a decision about how I'm going to be treated going forward." Victoria's face went white as the last of her lies dissolved in front of everyone. "From this moment on," I continued, my voice growing stronger with each word, "I will no longer fund events, celebrations, or experiences where I am not treated with respect and inclusion. I will no longer enable anyone to take credit for my generosity while simultaneously excluding me from the joy that generosity creates." I looked directly at Victoria. "You can choose to continue this photo session with grace and kindness, acknowledging what I've contributed and including me as Emma has requested. Or you can continue to be hostile and controlling, in which case I will be leaving, and you can explain to Sarah why the person who paid for her services is no longer participating." The ultimatum was clear, and for the first time in 42 years, I meant every word of it. What Victoria chose to do next would determine not just the rest of this afternoon, but the entire future of our relationship. Victoria stood frozen for what felt like an eternity, the weight of my ultimatum settling over the gathering like a heavy blanket. Her eyes darted from face to face, Emma's determined expression, Jake's disappointed frown, Sarah's professional discomfort, and my unwavering gaze. For the first time in decades, she was in a situation where her charm and manipulation couldn't reshape reality to her liking. "Fine," she said finally, her voice tight with barely controlled rage. "Fine, take your precious photos, but don't expect me to pretend this is normal or healthy behavior." Even in surrender, Victoria couldn't resist one final attempt to paint me as the unreasonable one. But something in her tone, a particular edge I'd never heard before, made Emma step closer to me protectively. "Mom," Emma said quietly, "why are you making this so hard? All I want is a photo with my grandmother." Victoria's laugh was harsh and bitter. "Because, Emma, your precious grandmother has been manipulating this family with money for years, and everyone's too blind to see it. You think she's some kind of saint, but..." "But what?" Jake interrupted, his patience finally exhausted. "But she paid for your college? But she helped with our house down payment? But she funded Emma's preschool? What exactly has she done that's so terrible, Victoria?" That's when something shifted in Victoria's expression. A calculation, like she was weighing whether to reveal something she'd been keeping secret. The change was subtle, but unmistakable, and I felt a chill of premonition. "You want to know what she's done?" Victoria said, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You want to know the real Margaret Sinclair?" Emma's hand tightened on my arm, and I found myself holding my breath, wondering what lie Victoria was about to fabricate to deflect from her own behavior. "She drove my father away," Victoria continued, her words tumbling out now with the force of long-suppressed venom. "She was so needy, so clingy, so demanding of his time and attention that he couldn't stand being around us anymore. She suffocated him until he had no choice but to leave." The accusation hit me like a physical blow, not because it was true, but because it revealed the depth of the lie Victoria had been telling herself, and apparently Jake, about our family history. "Victoria," I said slowly, "that's not what happened. Your father left because you drove him away," she shouted, all pretense of control finally abandoned. "You were always crying about money, always complaining about how hard everything was, always making him feel guilty for not earning enough to support your expensive tastes. He told me the truth before he left. He said he couldn't take your constant disappointment anymore." The silence that followed was deafening. Emma was staring at her mother with horror, while Jake looked like he was seeing Victoria clearly for the first time. Sarah had stopped pretending to adjust her equipment and was openly gaping at this family implosion. But it was the specific details of Victoria's accusation that cut deepest, because they revealed not just a lie, but a carefully constructed alternate reality that explained so much about her behavior over the years. "Emma," I said gently, never taking my eyes off Victoria, "would you like to know what really happened when your grandfather left?" Victoria's face went pale. "Don't you dare!" "Your grandfather left," I continued steadily, "because he had been having an affair with his secretary for over a year. When I discovered it and confronted him, he chose her over his family. He moved in with her the same week he left us." Emma's sharp intake of breath was audible across the yard. Jake was staring at Victoria with dawning comprehension and disgust. "That's not true," Victoria said, but her voice lacked conviction now. He told an 8-year-old girl whatever he thought would hurt me most and absolve him of responsibility for abandoning his family," I said firmly. "Victoria, I found the credit card statements showing hotels, jewelry, dinners. For 2. I found the apartment lease with both their names on it. I found love letters she had written to him." The revelation was clearly news to Emma, but what was more telling was Jake's expression. He was looking at Victoria like she was a stranger, and I realized he was probably wondering what other lies she had told him about her past. "Why didn't you ever tell me the truth?" Victoria whispered, and for a moment I heard the hurt 8-year-old she had once been. "Because you were a child who had just lost her father," I said softly. "Because I thought protecting you from the ugly truth was more important than protecting myself from blame. Because I believed that letting you think well of him was better than letting you know he had chosen another woman over his daughter." Victoria sank onto one of the patio chairs, her earlier rage replaced by something that looked like shock. "But he said, he told me you were impossible to live with, that you made everything about money and never appreciated what he provided." "Victoria," I said gently, sitting down across from her, "your father made $38,000 a year as an insurance adjuster. I made $42,000 as a hospital technician. There was no lavish lifestyle to maintain, no expensive tastes to satisfy. We lived in a modest house, drove used cars, and stretched every dollar to make ends meet. The only thing I ever complained about was when he spent money we didn't have on things we didn't need." Jake was shaking his head slowly. "Victoria, why would you believe him over your mother? Why would you carry that story for 34 years without ever questioning it?" The answer to Jake's question was written all over Victoria's face, but it was Emma who voiced it with the clarity that only comes from youth and honesty. "Because it was easier to blame Grandma Margaret than to accept that Grandpa just didn't want to be our family anymore," Emma said quietly. "Because if Grandma drove him away, then maybe she could drive other people away too, and that would explain why—" Emma stopped herself, but the unfinished thought hung in the air. It would explain why Victoria had spent years treating me as someone whose love was conditional, whose presence was a threat, whose generosity came with hidden costs. Victoria had built our entire relationship on the foundation of a lie told by a cheating husband to an 8-year-old girl. She had spent decades punishing me for crimes I hadn't committed, while I had enabled her behavior by accepting guilt I didn't deserve. "Victoria," I said, my voice breaking with 34 years of accumulated hurt, "I have spent over 3 decades trying to prove to you that I'm not the woman your father described. I worked extra shifts, sacrificed my own needs, gave you everything I had, and never asked for anything in return except basic respect and inclusion. I thought, if I just loved you enough, supported you enough, gave you enough, you would finally see that your father was lying." Tears were streaming down Victoria's face now, the carefully constructed narrative of her life crumbling before her eyes. "But you never told me the truth. You let me believe—" "I let you believe your father was a good man who made a difficult choice," I interrupted. "I let you keep your childhood innocence a little longer. I protected you from the knowledge that he abandoned us for another woman without a backward glance. I thought I was being a good mother." Sarah, the photographer, cleared her throat delicately. "I'm so sorry to interrupt, but I have another appointment in an hour. Would you like to continue with the photos, or should we reschedule?" The practical question forced us all back to the present moment, to the decision that still needed to be made about how this day would end. Victoria looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes that held something I hadn't seen in years: uncertainty, vulnerability, and perhaps the beginning of understanding. "Mom," she said, and her voice sounded younger than Emma's, "I don't know how to fix this. I don't know how to take back 34 years of being wrong about everything." It was the first genuine thing Victoria had said to me in longer than I could remember. And it was the moment when I had to decide whether forgiveness was possible, or whether some wounds cut too deep to heal. Victoria stared at Emma as if she had been slapped. Her own daughter, the one she had been trying to protect from my supposed manipulation, was choosing to stand with me despite everything Victoria had just revealed. The calculated cruelty of exposing my private financial decisions had backfired spectacularly. "Emma," Victoria said, her voice taking on a desperate, pleading quality, "you don't understand what you're doing. She's manipulated you into feeling sorry for her. Can't you see that? The crying, the hurt feelings, The dramatic revelations about paying for the photographer. It's all designed to make you choose her over me. Emma's response was swift and devastating in its simplicity. Mom, nobody manipulated me into anything. I watched you exclude Grandma Margaret from photos she paid for. I watched you try to hide her contribution from everyone. I watched you call her dramatic and difficult when she asked for basic respect. That's not manipulation. That's just what happened. Jake stepped forward, his face grim with a new understanding. Victoria, I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly. When you called your mother crying about the photography session being financially impossible, was that true? Were we really unable to afford it? The question hung in the air like a trap, and Victoria's hesitation before answering told us everything we needed to know. We could have afforded it eventually, she said carefully, but it would have been tight, and with your law school starting— That's not what I asked, Jake interrupted, his voice harder than I'd ever heard it. I asked if we were unable to afford it. Because my parents offered to help with graduation expenses, remember? You turned them down. You said we had it handled. Victoria's face flushed crimson. I didn't want to be indebted to your parents. I thought it would be better to keep it in the family. So you lied to your mother, Jake said flatly. You made her think we were desperate when we weren't. You manipulated her into paying for something we could have managed ourselves, and then you excluded her from the event she funded. The accusation hit like a physical blow because it reframed everything that had happened in stark, undeniable terms. Victoria hadn't just excluded me from photos. She had deliberately created a false crisis to extract money from me, then treated me as unworthy of inclusion in the celebration that money made possible. Sarah, the photographer, who had been trying to blend into the background during this family implosion, finally spoke up. Perhaps I should come back another day? This seems like something your family needs to work through privately. No, Emma said firmly. I still want photos today, just not the way Mom planned them. She turned to Victoria with an expression that was heartbreaking in its maturity. Mom, I love you, but I'm not going to participate in treating Grandma Margaret badly. If you want to be in photos, you can be in them, but you need to apologize first. Victoria's laugh was sharp and bitter. Apologize for what? For trying to plan a nice graduation celebration? For wanting photos that looked professional and coordinated? For protecting you from the guilt trips and emotional manipulation you're too young to recognize? For lying, Emma said simply. For using Grandma Margaret's love against her. For making her pay for something and then acting like she was an unwelcome stranger at the event she funded. Jake was nodding slowly, pieces clicking into place. Victoria, how many other times have you done this? How many other crises have you created to get money from your mother while simultaneously resenting her for giving it? The question seemed to break something in Victoria. Her face crumpled, but instead of tears, what emerged was a kind of frustrated rage that had apparently been building for years. You want to know the truth? She spat. Fine. The truth is that every single thing she's ever given me has come with invisible strings attached. Every dollar has made me feel smaller, more dependent, more like I was failing as an adult. You think it's easy being the daughter of a martyr? You think it's fun having a mother who works herself into exhaustion to pay for your life and then acts surprised when you can't live up to her sacrifices? I never asked you to live up to anything, I said quietly. But Victoria wasn't finished. Didn't you? She demanded. Every time you picked up extra shifts, every time you refinanced your house, every time you made some grand sacrifice, there was an expectation there. An expectation that I would be grateful enough, loving enough, appreciative, enough to make it worth it. And I never was I, Mom? I was never grateful enough for you. The raw honesty of it was devastating because there was a grain of truth in what she was saying. I had made sacrifices, and yes, I had hoped for gratitude. I had wanted to feel valued and appreciated for what I had given. But what Victoria didn't understand was that the gratitude I wanted wasn't performances or guilty obligation. It was basic respect and inclusion in the family I had worked so hard to support. "Victoria," I said, my voice steady despite the storm of emotions her words had unleashed. "I never wanted you to feel guilty about my choices. I wanted you to feel loved. But somewhere along the way, you started treating my love like a burden instead of a gift. And instead of talking to me about those feelings, you decided the solution was to take what I offered while simultaneously punishing me for offering it." Jake was staring at Victoria with something approaching horror. "Is that what this is about? You've been cruel to your mother because you feel guilty about accepting her help? Victoria, that's insane." "Don't call me insane," Victoria snapped. "You have no idea what it's like growing up knowing that your mother's happiness depends on how grateful you can manage to be. You don't know what it's like feeling like every gift is a test you're failing." Emma had been listening to this exchange with growing sadness, and when she finally spoke, her voice was thick with tears. "Mom, Grandma Margaret never made me feel like that. She never made me feel like her gifts were tests. She just loves us. And today, instead of including her in our celebration, you hurt her. You hurt someone who loves us." Patricia Henderson, who had been quietly observing from the edge of the gathering, finally stepped forward. "I think Robert and I really should leave now. This feels like a conversation your family needs to have without an audience." But as she moved toward the house, she paused next to me. "Margaret," she said quietly, "I want you to know that what we witnessed here today, the way you've been treated, it's not acceptable. You seem like a lovely woman who deserves much better." The validation from a relative stranger, someone who had no stake in our family dynamics, seemed to cut through all of Victoria's attempts at justification. Even people who barely knew us could see the basic unfairness of what had happened. Jake's parents gathered their things and prepared to leave. Jake caught his mother's arm. "Mom, wait. I need to know. Did you really offer to help with graduation expenses? Because Victoria told me you hadn't." Patricia's eyebrows rose. "Of course we offered. We specifically asked if there was anything we could contribute to Emma's celebration. Victoria assured us that everything was taken care of." Another lie exposed. Another layer of Victoria's deception revealed. Jake's face was ashen as he turned back to Victoria. "So you turned down help from my parents, lied to your mother about our financial situation, took her money under false pretenses, and then excluded her from the event she funded. Have I got that right?" Victoria's silence was answer enough. Emma walked over to where Sarah stood with her camera equipment. "I'm sorry about all this drama. I know this isn't what you signed up for when you took this job. But if you're willing to stay just a little longer, I would really like to take some photos that actually represent what today should be about." Sarah nodded sympathetically. "Of course, dear. Family dynamics can be complicated. I've seen all kinds of situations in this job. Just tell me what you'd like to do." Emma looked around at all of us, Victoria standing isolated in her anger and defensiveness, Jake grappling with revelations about the woman he'd been planning to marry, me struggling to process the depth of my daughter's resentment, and the lingering aftermath of a confrontation that had exposed truths none of us had been prepared to face. "I want pictures that show the people who actually made today possible," Emma said with quiet determination. "Starting with my grandmother, who has always been there for me, and who deserves to be celebrated today instead of attacked." What happened next would determine whether our family could find a path toward healing, or whether the damage Victoria had inflicted, on me, on herself, and on the trust that holds families together, was simply too deep to overcome. Emma's declaration about wanting photos with people who actually made today possible created a moment of crystalline clarity. As she stood there in her cap and gown, her young face set with a determination that reminded me so much of myself at her age. I realized I was witnessing something remarkable. My granddaughter choosing integrity over family politics. Truth over convenience. "Grandma Margaret," Emma said, walking over and linking her arm through mine. "Would you stand with me for a photo? Just the two of us first?" The simple request, asked with such love and respect, was everything I had hoped for when I first arrived at this celebration. But more than that, it was Emma making a choice about what kind of person she wanted to be, what kind of family member she wanted to be. Sarah Chen positioned us near the garden wall where the lighting was soft and golden. As she adjusted her camera settings, I felt Emma squeeze my arm gently. "Grandma Margaret," she whispered, "I'm so sorry about everything that happened today. I had no idea Mom had asked you to pay for the photographer, and I definitely had no idea she was planning to exclude you from the photos. That's not who I want to be, and it's not the kind of family I want us to be." The maturity in her words, the moral clarity she was showing in the midst of this family chaos, filled me with a pride that had nothing to do with college degrees or career achievements. This was the pride of seeing someone you love choose to do the right thing, even when it's difficult. "You don't need to apologize for your mother's choices, sweetheart," I told her quietly, "but I'm grateful that you're making your own." Sarah captured several beautiful photos of Emma and me together, images that would forever represent not just a graduation celebration, but a moment when my granddaughter chose to honor the people who had supported her journey, rather than the people who demanded to be honored despite their behavior. After our photos, Emma turned to Jake. "Would you like to be in a picture with us? I know this has been a lot, but you're still important to me, and I hope you're okay." Jake nodded, though he looked like he was still processing everything he had learned about Victoria in the past hour. "I'd be honored," he said simply, and joined us for several more shots. Victoria stood off to the side, watching this unfold with an expression that cycled between hurt, anger, and something that might have been regret. When Emma finished with Jake and turned toward her, I could see the war happening behind Victoria's eyes. "Mom," Emma said gently, "you can be in photos too if you want. All you have to do is acknowledge that Grandma Margaret made today possible and that she deserves to be here." It was such a simple request, such a basic ask for human decency and acknowledgement. But Victoria's response revealed just how deep her issues ran. "I'm not going to grovel," Victoria said, her chin raised defiantly. "I'm not going to pretend that her paying for the photographer erases 40 years of guilt trips and emotional manipulation." Emma's face fell, but she straightened her shoulders with remarkable resilience. "Then I guess you're choosing not to be in the photos, because I'm not going to participate in a celebration that excludes someone who made it possible." Jake stepped forward, his face serious. "Victoria, I need to say something, and I need you to really hear it. What I've witnessed today, it's changed how I see you. It's changed how I see us." Victoria's defiance cracked slightly. "What do you mean?" "I mean that the woman I thought I was in love with wouldn't have lied to her mother about our finances, to manipulate money out of her. The woman I thought I was going to marry wouldn't have excluded that same mother from family photos after taking her money. The woman I thought I knew wouldn't have weaponized personal information to deflect from her own bad behavior." The silence that followed Jake's words was deafening. Victoria's face went through a series of expressions: shock, hurt, anger, and, finally, a kind of desperate realization. "Jake, you can't be serious. You can't be choosing her side over mine. We're supposed to be a team." "We are supposed to be a team," Jake agreed. "But teams don't lie to each other. Teams don't manipulate family members. Teams don't treat people who love them with cruelty and contempt." I felt a mix of sadness and relief watching this unfold. Sadness because I could see that Victoria's relationship with Jake was unraveling in real time, but relief because Jake was showing the kind of character and integrity that made him worthy of my granddaughter's affection. Emma, meanwhile, had approached Sarah again. "Could we take one more set of photos? I'd like one with Grandma Margaret and Jake together, if that's okay with both of you." "I'd be honored," I said, meaning it completely. Despite everything that had happened, seeing my granddaughter choose to create a family photo based on love and respect, rather than obligation and manipulation, felt like a victory. As Sarah photographed the three of us together, 3 generations, connected not by blood alone but by mutual respect and genuine affection, I realized that something profound was happening. A new family dynamic was being born, one based on choice rather than guilt, appreciation rather than obligation. Victoria remained on the sidelines, watching us with an expression that was becoming increasingly isolated and uncertain. For the eye, first time in our decades-long relationship, she was the one being excluded, and she was experiencing what it felt like to watch family moments happen without her. "Victoria," I said finally, turning to address her directly, "the invitation is still open. You can join us anytime you're ready to treat me with basic respect." But instead of softening, Victoria's expression hardened further. "This is unbelievable," she said, her voice rising. "My own daughter and my boyfriend are choosing a manipulative old woman over me. You've turned them both against me." Emma's response was swift and clear. "Nobody turned me against you, Mom. I watched you hurt someone I love and I chose not to participate in that. That's not manipulation. That's having standards." Jake nodded in agreement. "Victoria, your mother didn't turn me against you. Your behavior did that, all by itself." The weight of being confronted by both Emma and Jake seemed to finally penetrate Victoria's defenses. For a moment, her mask slipped completely, and I saw something I hadn't seen in years: vulnerability. Real, genuine vulnerability beneath all the anger and manipulation. "I never meant for it to be like this," she said quietly. And for the first time all afternoon, her voice sounded genuinely confused rather than defensive. I felt so trapped by all the help, all the sacrifices. I felt like I could never be good enough, grateful enough, worthy enough of everything she'd given up for me. It was the first honest thing Victoria had said all day, and it broke my heart because I could finally see the scared daughter underneath all the adult resentment and manipulation. "Victoria," I said gently, "I never wanted you to feel trapped. I wanted you to feel loved. But if my help felt like pressure, if my sacrifices felt like demands, why didn't you ever talk to me about it? Why didn't you tell me how you were feeling, instead of taking my money while simultaneously resenting me for giving it?" Victoria's eyes filled with tears for the first time since this confrontation began. "Because I didn't know how to say no to something that was given with love, even when accepting it made me feel smaller. And I didn't know how to tell you that. Your sacrifices made me feel guilty instead of grateful. Finally, we were getting to the root of the problem that had been poisoning our relationship for years." Victoria's resentment hadn't been about my behavior. It had been about her own inability to set boundaries, her own guilt about accepting help she wasn't sure she deserved, her own fear that she was never good enough to justify the sacrifices I had made. But understanding the root of the problem and fixing the damage it had caused were two very different things. What came next would determine whether this moment of honesty could become the foundation for healing, or whether the patterns we had established over decades were too entrenched to change. Victoria's tears were flowing freely now, and for the first time in years, they seemed genuine rather than manipulative. The facade she had maintained, the perfect daughter, the successful professional, the woman who had it all together, had completely crumbled, leaving behind someone who looked young and lost and deeply ashamed. "I know I've ruined everything," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know I've been horrible to you, Mom. I know I've lied and manipulated and hurt you in ways that probably can't be forgiven." Emma walked over to her mother, her face soft with compassion despite everything that had happened. "Mom, it's not about forgiveness. It's about change. It's about choosing to be different going forward. Victoria looked up at her daughter with something approaching wonder. When did you become so wise? When I watched my grandmother work herself sick to pay for my life, and then get excluded from celebrating the milestones she made possible, Emma replied quietly. When I realized that love isn't about keeping score, but it is about showing respect. Jake, who had been watching this exchange with careful attention, finally spoke. Victoria, I need to know something. Is this real? This vulnerability, this honesty? Is this who you actually are underneath all the defensive behavior? Or is this just another strategy to get what you want? It was a fair question, and a necessary one. We had all been subjected to Victoria's manipulation for so long that genuine emotion was hard to distinguish from performance. Victoria was quiet for a long moment, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. I don't know, she said finally, and the honesty of that admission was somehow more convincing than any passionate declaration would have been. I've been performing for so long, I'm not sure I remember how to just be real. But I'm tired, Jake. I'm so tired of being angry. All the time, of feeling guilty and resentful and defensive. I'm tired of hurting people I love because I don't know how to handle my own feelings. Sarah, the photographer, who had been quietly packing her equipment during this family reckoning, paused in her work. I'm sorry to interrupt, she said gently, but I wanted to let you know that I have some beautiful photos from today. Despite everything that happened, there's real love in these images. Emma, the photos of you and your grandmother are particularly special. Emma smiled through her own tears. Thank you. I think they're going to mean more to me than any of the formal shots we originally planned. Victoria winced at the implication that the authentic moments captured today were more valuable than the carefully orchestrated perfection she had tried to create. But instead of getting defensive, she nodded slowly. You're right, she said to Emma. The real moments are always more important than the perfect ones. I felt something shift inside me at those words. Not forgiveness, exactly. That would take time and sustained change in behavior. But hope. Hope that the daughter I had raised with so much love was still there underneath all the hurt and dysfunction. Victoria, I said carefully, what you've said today helps me understand what's been happening between us. But understanding isn't the same as fixing. If we're going to move forward, things have to change. Really change. Victoria nodded eagerly. Yes, I want that. I want to change. I want to fix this. What does that look like to you? Jake asked, and I was grateful for his practical approach. Grand promises were easy to make in emotional moments. Specific commitments were harder but more meaningful. Victoria took a shaky breath. I think I need to go to therapy. Real therapy, not just saying I'll go, but actually doing it. I need to understand why I respond to love with resentment, why I take generosity and turn it into ammunition against the person who gave it. Emma reached out and took her mother's hand. I think that's a good start, Mom. And I need to apologize, Victoria continued, looking directly at me. Not just today, but for years of taking your sacrifices for granted, for treating your love like a burden, for excluding you from family events after you made them possible. The apology was a start, but I knew that real change would require more than words. Victoria, I appreciate that, but what I need most isn't apologies. It's different behavior. I need to be treated with respect and included in the family I've supported for 42 years. You will be, Victoria said, and there was a firmness in her voice that I hadn't heard before. Mom, I want to ask you something, and I want you to think about it honestly. Would you be willing to come to therapy with me? Not because you need fixing, but because I think I need help learning how to have a healthy relationship with you. The request surprised me. I had expected continued defensiveness or demands that I change my expectations. I hadn't expected Victoria to ask for help in rebuilding what we had lost. I'd be willing to consider that, I said carefully. If the therapist is qualified to deal with family financial dynamics, and if you're genuinely committed to the process. Jake stepped forward, his expression serious but somehow lighter than it had been all afternoon. Victoria, I want you to know that I'm willing to work through this with you, but I need to see consistent change, not just promises made in emotional moments. Victoria nodded, reaching for his hand. I understand. I know I have a lot to prove to all of you. I know trust isn't rebuilt overnight. Emma looked around at all of us, her mother with her tear-stained face, Jake with his cautious hope, me with my guarded optimism, and Sarah still quietly documenting this moment of family reconciliation. You know what? Emma said suddenly. I think we should take one more photo, all of us together. Not because everything is fixed, but because today was the day we finally started telling the truth to each other. It was a wise suggestion from my remarkable granddaughter. The photo wouldn't represent a perfect family or a complete resolution, but it would capture a moment of honesty and possibility. As Sarah positioned us for the final shot, I found myself standing next to Victoria for the first time all day. She looked at me tentatively, and I saw in her face the 8-year-old girl who had waited on the porch steps for a father who would never return. Mom, she said quietly, so only I could hear. I'm scared that I'm too broken to fix this. I'm scared that I've hurt you too badly for you to ever really trust me again. The vulnerability in her admission touched something deep in my heart. Victoria, I said softly, I raised you to be strong enough to do hard things. Changing destructive patterns is one of the hardest things anyone can do, but you're capable of it. We're capable of it, together. As Sarah's camera captured our family in that moment, imperfect, wounded, but finally honest with each other, I realized that this was actually the photo Victoria should have wanted all along. Not a picture of artificial perfection and false harmony, but an image of people who loved each other enough to do the difficult work of truth-telling and change. The healing wouldn't happen overnight. Victoria would need to prove through consistent actions that her commitment to change was real. I would need to learn how to trust again while maintaining the boundaries that protected my well-being. Jake would need to decide whether the woman Victoria was becoming was someone he could build a future with. But for the first time in years, we were all working from the same foundation of honesty. And that, I realized, was where real love could finally begin to grow again. 6 months later, I found myself standing in the same backyard in Rosewood Heights, but everything was different. The occasion was Emma's 23rd birthday, and as I watched my granddaughter laugh with friends around the fire pit Jake had built himself, I marveled at how much had changed since that explosive afternoon when a family photo session became a reckoning 42 years in the making. The transformation hadn't been instant or magical. There had been difficult conversations, family therapy sessions that left us all emotionally drained, and moments when old patterns threatened to reassert themselves. But the foundation we had laid that day, built on honesty, respect, and genuine accountability, had held strong. Victoria approached me carrying 2 cups of coffee, a small gesture that would have seemed insignificant to an outsider, but represented a seismic shift in our relationship. For the first time in decades, she was the one bringing me something, offering comfort, rather than asking for assistance. Thank you, sweetheart, I said, accepting the cup gratefully. The endearment came naturally now, without the careful calculation that had characterized our interactions for so many years. I wanted to tell you something, Victoria said, settling into the chair beside me. Dr. Reeves says I'm making real progress in therapy. She thinks I'm ready to start talking about the next step. Dr. Sarah Reeves was the family therapist Victoria had started seeing 2 weeks after the graduation photo session. Individual therapy had led to joint sessions with Emma and eventually to family meetings that included me. It had been painful work, excavating decades of unspoken resentments and unexamined patterns, but it had also been healing in ways I hadn't thought possible. What kind of next step? I asked, genuinely curious rather than wary. The wariness that had characterized my interactions with Victoria for years had gradually faded as her commitment to change became evident through actions rather than just words. "I want to start paying you back," she said simply. "Not everything. We both know that's not realistic. But I want to start acknowledging your financial contributions with something more than words. I want to create a plan for gradually taking over expenses you've been covering, starting with Emma's car insurance and moving forward from there." The offer touched me deeply, not because I needed the money, but because it represented Victoria taking ownership of her adult responsibilities and recognizing the impact of my sacrifices. More importantly, it came without the resentment and guilt that had poisoned our relationship for so long. "Victoria, you don't have to," I began, but she held up her hand with a smile that reminded me of the confident young woman she had been before resentment and guilt had twisted our family dynamics. "I want to," she said firmly. Dr. Reeves helped me understand that part of my resentment came from feeling like a child who was dependent on her mother's generosity. I need to feel like an adult who can take care of her own responsibilities, even if it means making some lifestyle adjustments. Indeed, Victoria and Jake had made significant changes over the past 6 months. They had moved to a smaller, more affordable house in a neighborhood that better matched their actual income. Victoria had taken on freelance marketing projects to supplement her salary. Jake had started a small landscaping business on weekends to help build their financial independence. The changes hadn't been easy, but they had been liberating. Victoria seemed lighter somehow, more confident, less burdened by the weight of unacknowledged obligations and unspoken resentments. "There's something else," Victoria continued, and I could see her gathering courage for whatever she was about to say. "I want to ask your forgiveness for something specific." I waited, giving her the space to find her words. "That day, when I revealed your life insurance policy and will information in front of everyone, that was inexcusable. I weaponized your private financial planning to deflect from my own bad behavior. I used your love for Emma against you in the cruelest way possible." She paused, her voice thick with emotion. "I've been carrying the shame of that for months, and I need you to know how deeply sorry I am." The apology meant everything to me because it acknowledged the specific cruelty of what she had done, not just the general dysfunction of our relationship. It showed that Victoria understood the difference between explanation and justification, between having complicated feelings and acting on them destructively. "I forgive you," I said, meaning it completely. "But more than that, I'm proud of the work you've done to understand why it happened and to make sure it doesn't happen again." Emma approached us, her face glowing with the happiness that comes from being surrounded by people who genuinely care about each other. "What are you two plotting over here?" she asked, settling on the grass at our feet. "Just talking about how much things have changed," Victoria said, reaching down to smooth Emma's hair with a tenderness I hadn't seen from her in years. "They really have," Emma agreed. "You know what I love most about our family now? We actually talk to each other. Like, really talk. About hard things, about feelings, about problems before they become explosions." She was right. The family therapy had taught us communication skills we had never learned naturally. We had practiced expressing needs without manipulation, setting boundaries without cruelty, and accepting help without resentment. It had been like learning a new language, but one that allowed us to finally understand each other. Jake joined us, carrying a plate of the birthday cake he had made himself, another small but significant gesture toward independence and self-sufficiency. "Mrs. Sinclair, I wanted to thank you again for helping me understand something important that day." "What's that?" I asked. "You showed me what it looks like to stand up for yourself with dignity. When you set that boundary about not funding events where you weren't treated with respect, you weren't being manipulative or dramatic. You were modeling healthy self-respect. It helped me understand what I needed to expect in my relationships, too. Jake and Victoria had worked through their own issues in couples counseling, addressing the lies and manipulation that had nearly ended their relationship. Jake had learned to recognize manipulation when it happened, while Victoria had learned to communicate her needs directly rather than through destructive behaviors. As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, I found myself reflecting on the journey that had brought us to this place of genuine connection and mutual respect. The photo session that had seemed like such a disaster 6 months ago had actually been the catalyst for the most important transformation our family had ever experienced. The framed photo from that day, the final group shot we had taken after, all the truth-telling and apologies, now sat on my mantle at home. Not because it was perfectly composed or professionally lit, but because it captured the moment when we chose healing over resentment, honesty over manipulation, and love over control. Emma walked me to my car as I prepared to leave, another small tradition that had emerged from our new family dynamic. "Grandma Margaret," she said, hugging me tightly. "I'm so grateful for everything that happened that day. I know it was painful, but it gave us back our real family." As I drove home through the quiet streets of Cedar Falls, I thought about the letter I had started writing to my sister Ruth, trying to explain how a family photo session had become a masterclass in setting boundaries and demanding respect. The most important lesson I had realized wasn't about the specific conflict over photos or money. It was about the courage to stop accepting treatment that diminishes your worth, even when, especially when, that treatment comes from people you love. For 42 years, I had believed that love meant endless giving, infinite sacrifice, and grateful acceptance of whatever scraps of affection were offered in return. I had confused enabling with loving doormat behavior with generosity and silence with peace. What I learned that day in Victoria's backyard was that real love sometimes requires saying no. Real family sometimes means setting boundaries that feel uncomfortable. Real respect sometimes has to be demanded rather than simply hoped for. The most beautiful family photos aren't always the ones with perfect smiles and coordinated outfits. Sometimes they're the ones taken after the hardest conversations, when people choose to do better rather than just look better. And sometimes the greatest gift you can give your family isn't another sacrifice. It's the example of someone who knows their own worth and insists that others recognize it too. 2 years after that fateful graduation day, I received an unexpected phone call that would show me just how far the ripples of our family transformation had spread. "Mrs. Sinclair? This is Patricia Henderson, Jake's mother. I hope you remember me." Of course I remembered Patricia, the woman who had witnessed our family's most painful moment and had been one of the first to validate that my treatment had been unacceptable. But I was surprised to hear from her after all this time. "Patricia, how lovely to hear from you. How are you and Robert?" "We're well, thank you. But I'm actually calling because I wanted to share something with you and to ask for some advice." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "Margaret, what we witnessed that day at Emma's graduation, it changed something for me. It made me take a hard look at my own family dynamics." I settled into my chair, sensing this was going to be a significant conversation. "You see," Patricia continued, "watching you stand up for yourself with such dignity, watching you set boundaries while still offering love and forgiveness, it made me realize I've been enabling some very unhealthy behavior in my own family." She went on to explain that she had been financially supporting her oldest son, David, for nearly a decade. Unlike my situation with Victoria, David had never shown gratitude or made efforts toward independence. Instead, he had become increasingly demanding and entitled, treating his parents like a personal bank while offering nothing but criticism and complaints in return. After seeing how you handled Victoria's behavior, I realized I was doing David no favors by continuing to fund his lifestyle while he treated us with contempt. Last month, Robert and I told him we were stopping all financial support. The reaction was explosive. I can imagine, I said, remembering the rage in Victoria's eyes when I had first set my boundaries. How are you holding up? It's been difficult, Patricia admitted. David accused us of being cruel and unloving. He's turned other family members against us, claiming we're abandoning him in his time of need. There are days when I wonder if we made the right choice. But you're calling me, I observed, which suggests you know in your heart that you did. Exactly. Watching your family's transformation over the past 2 years, seeing how much healthier Victoria and Emma's relationship has become, seeing how much more genuine affection there is between all of you now, it's given me hope that we're on the right path too. Patricia's story reminded me of something Dr. Reeves had said during one of our family therapy sessions. When we stop enabling destructive behavior, we're not being cruel. We're creating space for people to grow into their better selves. Margaret. Patricia continued. I was wondering if you might be willing to meet for coffee sometime. I know it's a lot to ask, but I could really use the wisdom of someone who's walked this path before me. The request touched me deeply. Not just because Patricia valued my experience, but because it showed how the courage to set boundaries could inspire others to examine their own relationships and make necessary changes. I'd be honored to meet with you, I said. In fact, there's a support group that meets at the Cedar Falls Community Center every Thursday evening. It's for people dealing with enabling patterns in their families. I started attending about a year ago, and it's been incredibly helpful. There's a support group for this. Patricia sounded surprised and relieved. Oh, yes. It turns out there are quite a few of us who've had to learn the hard way that love without boundaries isn't really love at all. It's just fear dressed up as generosity. After we hung up, I reflected on how profoundly that terrible afternoon at Emma's graduation had changed not just our family, but had sent ripples of transformation into other lives as well. Jake had mentioned that several of his friends had been inspired by our family's journey to have difficult but necessary conversations with their own relatives. Emma had started a peer support group at her new job for young adults dealing with family financial manipulation. Even Sarah Chen, the photographer who had witnessed our breakdown and breakthrough, had reached out 6 months later to tell me that our story had inspired her to set boundaries with her own mother, who had been using guilt and manipulation to control Sarah's career choices. The framed photo from that day still sat on my mantle, but now it was accompanied by new pictures, images, from healthy family celebrations, photos where everyone was included not out of obligation, but out of genuine love and respect. There were pictures from Emma's new job celebration, from Victoria and Jake's commitment ceremony, a small, intimate affair they actually planned and paid for themselves, and from my own 65th birthday party, where I was surrounded by people who valued me for who I was, not what I could provide. That evening, I opened my laptop and began typing an email to my sister Ruth. Dear Ruth, you asked me recently how I found the courage to change a relationship pattern that had been decades in the making. The answer is that I finally realized I had a choice. I could continue accepting treatment that diminished my worth, or I could risk everything by demanding better. The risk felt enormous at the time, but the alternative, living the rest of my life as a bank account with feelings, felt worse. The most surprising thing about setting boundaries isn't how it changes the people who've been taking advantage of you, though it often does. It's how it changes you. When you finally stand up for yourself, when you finally say, I deserve better than this, you discover a strength and self-respect you didn't know you possessed. You also discover that when you stop accepting less than you deserve, you create space for people who will give you what you're worth. Some relationships don't survive that test, and that tells you everything you need to know about what those relationships really were. But the ones that do survive become deeper, more genuine, and more loving than they ever were before. I'm not sharing this story to encourage others to blow up their family dynamics, though sometimes that's exactly what's needed. I'm sharing it because I want people to know that it's never too late to change how you allow yourself to be treated. It's never too late to model self-respect for the people you love. And it's never too late to teach others that relationships, based on genuine love and mutual respect, are worth fighting for. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for your family is to stop enabling them to treat you badly. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give your children is the example of someone who knows their own worth. And sometimes the most beautiful family moments come not from perfect planning, but from imperfect people choosing to do better. With love and boundaries firmly in place, Margaret. As I finished the email and prepared for bed, I thought about the support group meeting tomorrow evening, where I would continue to share my story with people who needed to hear that change was possible, that boundaries could be loving, and that it was never too late to demand the respect you deserved. The greatest legacy of that painful afternoon wasn't the family photos we eventually took, beautiful as they were. It was the ripple effect of courage, showing others that standing up for yourself wasn't selfish, but necessary, and that real love could only flourish in relationships built on mutual respect and genuine appreciation. Sometimes the most important story you can tell isn't about the perfect family moment, but about the imperfect family that chose to do the hard work of becoming better. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.